Thank you, Tim. I'd like to ask my panel, actually I'll get up here for a moment, to come to the stage. And that's Dame Therese Walsh, Chair of Air New Zealand, also Miles Hurrell, CEO of Fonterra, and Todd McClay, if you'd come up and join us again too. In the middle. Yeah, no, you in there.
This one?
Yep. Yeah, Miles here, Todd up the far end. Thank you. Thank you very much. This theme of doubling New Zealand's exports by value is a pretty major one. I mean, essentially what the Prime Minister said, $190 billion in annual exports by 2034, won't be adopted unless we take a very sort of forward-leaning policy to get out into the region, as he puts it, get your hustle on. I'm sure that it's viewed somewhat differently in boardrooms, and we'll hear a bit about that now. But one of the issues, of course, is how do we continue to grow with China, expand footprints into other markets? Who puts the resources behind this? What happens with places like MFAT, NZTE, obviously in companies as well? And so talking to us today are two people who co-led the Prime Minister's business mission to Southeast Asia. They have had their hustle on. They have been working extraordinary hours, starting at something like 6:30 in the morning, finishing at 10 o'clock each night. And that's only what we saw public side. A lot of other things happened behind scenes as well. But anyway, I'd like to just start by, first of all, getting each of our two speakers to give us a bit of a potted history or summation of actually where you are now with China. And perhaps we can start with you, Miles.
Well, thank you, and great to be here again, Fran, 10 years on from the first one of these. I mean, our relationship with China continues to go from strength to strength, and I think, even sitting here last year, we were starting to see some signs of wobbling within the dairy sector in China in particular, food consumption starting to soften a little bit. But we've seen our way through that, and it continues to go from strength to strength, as I say. Some of our key categories that they're focused on, the out-of-home consumption, the cheese consumption continues to grow, the active living, the healthy ageing categories, those continue to grow as well. And in fact, only in the last couple of years, we've seen sort of 100% growth year on in the last couple of years in some of those categories. So we're in a really good position. I think we just need to keep an eye on some of the geopolitical tensions that have been referred to this morning. But our goal really is to focus on what we do well, take our products to the world, and as I say, it's in a really good space.
Can you just give us a little bit of a sense of also the major strategic moves you announced last week with the consumer business? Does that impact at all on China? That's a bit of a question.
Well, it won't impact China. In fact, if I listen to the ambassador this morning talking about the strength of relationships, I mean, our consumer business is a small portion of the New Zealand milk component. Our focus and our strength really is at our B2B business, whether it be out-of-home consumption, referred to all those advanced ingredients. And so it's about recognising the importance of the relationships we have with some of those key customers in China. They have wonderfully strong brands that are now starting to enter the international market. So how do we support them and their growth through bringing our innovation and the quality of what we produce here in New Zealand and take it to those companies domestically in China?
Thank you. Dame Therese, Air New Zealand.
Kia ora koutou, thanks Fran, and just firstly can I acknowledge some of the folk in the room that accompanied us on the Southeast Asian mission. I can see Jess and I saw Mark before, and of course yourself Fran, bringing it as well, 6:30am to 10:30pm. Look, in terms of Air New Zealand, I think a couple of things. Firstly, it's been the best part of 2 decades that airlink has been there directly between New Zealand and China, and we've been a part of that the whole time, obviously. We continue to have that link in place. I think it's still building back pre-COVID, so I would say we're somewhere between 60 and 70% of where we were pre-COVID. But we have intentionally and strategically kept that going even through those very dark times of COVID. So everything from evacuating people from Wuhan through to keeping the export lines open throughout COVID with air freight and other passenger services during that time, it's considered strategically important. And I think that's the key thing to say. You know, sometimes as we have fleet issues or whatever, we might, we might pause on a route, or we might, change things. It is highly unlikely we would change that fundamental route between New Zealand and China.
You're just thinking about Southeast Asia, because that's just where you've been. There was a great deal of talk from the Prime Minister and other political leaders about opening new direct air routes into Philippines, elsewhere. And I suspect probably later you'll probably get a bit of enticement to think about India. So, I mean, how does a relatively small airline balance all of that?
Yes, it's quite tricky. When we were in Southeast Asia, Miles will giggle when I say this, because when we went, particularly in Thailand, the Prime Minister was very energised about the prospect of direct airlink travel, so received that pressure firsthand. I mean, look, I think just more broadly, if I can go more broadly for a minute, Fran, and I think Miles would agree with me, going to Southeast Asia, particularly for those of us who don't do as much business there, it really opened our eyes to the growth that's happening there, to some of the opportunities that are happening there, and dispelled some of the myths that many of us hold in our own minds around Southeast Asia. So that's really important. So, in terms of prospects for Air New Zealand going forward, absolutely, they are alive and well. We have many prospects. You've mentioned India as well, which is an important one. And we also need to rebuild on certain other routes, like China. As I said, it's not quite back to full capacity pre-COVID, and there'll be further growth opportunities. So there's a lot there in the pipeline. We've got the planes queuing up ready to kind of come in, but it's going to take a couple of years just as the aircraft manufacturers bounce back from COVID. But there are a lot of opportunities there to link tourism and trade and exports as we move forward.
What about you, Miles? What are you seeing?
Well, first, just a point of clarification, Dame Therese, you mentioned the Prime Minister putting pressure on you to direct routes to Thailand. It was the Thai Prime Minister, just to be clear. That was
yes,
not.
Sorry, well, actually, I think it was both.
Both as well. Well, Southeast Asia, and I think I talked about it for those that were on the trip with us. I mean, we're pushing on an open door in that market. It is, we see Southeast Asia from a Fonterra perspective as our backyard. I mean, it's still a 10-hour sort of flight away, but we still see it as our home market. And so you're pushing an open door, but what I saw come through quite loud and clear was the opportunity for services. And interesting to talk about the gaming industry here this morning. Has come up a couple of times. I mean, the service industry in Southeast Asia has huge potential, and we saw companies like Carbon Click sign a partnership up there with Changi Airport. Becca's been up in that market, a consultancy business for a number of years, and so I think that sort of gets forgotten about a little bit. We often talk about products. And we talk about the primary sector, which is great from our perspective, but I think there's a huge opportunity for services as well in that market, and that really shone through for me on that trip.
Yeah, I mean, what are the lessons that both of your companies have learned, I guess, from building from a toehold into China to quite significant businesses over a good 15-year period?
Yeah, I think boots on the ground, we've referred to this quite a lot. I mean, the Trade Minister talking about the lovely lady from Invercargill trying to sell her cushions. I mean, all well and good to her, but unless she was in the market doing the hard mahi, it just doesn't get handed to you. And so, it's been one of the foundations of Fonterra for many, many years, is having people on the ground in our key markets, and that's something that I would encourage. It's an investment for the long term, but it's something, if you want to get the best of that market, you've got to have the people on the ground that understand what you're firstly selling, but also can engage directly with the customers and governments in those markets.
And, it's interesting, Air New Zealand runs a global business and across that Asia sort of Pacific rim, and actually Shanghai is probably the only place outside of New Zealand where we have a crew base. That's where we employ local people, and that is for exactly the reason that Miles outlined. And just linking it back to Southeast Asia again, and I think the same applies in China, this whole having boots on the ground and partnering with locals who can help you. As the Prime Minister said earlier, it's looking for that slither, and we learnt a lot about that in Southeast Asia. Looking for that slither, looking for a partner who can help you, and don't just take for granted that you can just pop in with your cushions and get going, that you need all of that. So even with Air New Zealand, we take a different approach in China to other countries.
Todd, what are you expecting from the business sector as you seek to double exports by value?
Well, it's, Fran, it's very much to take the challenge on. As I mentioned when I was speaking earlier, many of the sectors in New Zealand are now thinking about what it means to them, what do they have to do, what do they need from the government to help us deliver on this very ambitious goal of doubling exports by value over the 10-year period. And I think that's really important because I am an old-fashioned believer that government should do less, but what they do, they should do better. So if the solution to every problem in the world is the government, then there'd be no more problems. And of course, we know that's not the case. And so what we're going to do is have a proper, true, respectful partnership with the business sector in New Zealand, but we also have to be realistic about where government investment and effort should go and where it can't. We know that everybody's having to tighten the belt a little bit at the moment. We then need very responsible conversations about where everybody should put that effort in. So this, the talk about the Southeast Asia is very interesting. It's very important. If I think over, this is not about looking backwards and blame, it's just an observation, but I think over the last 6 years of the previous government, there were 12 to 15 visits, missions up to the European Union, 2 or 3 to Southeast Asia, yet the growth in those Southeast Asian countries and markets is fantastic, nothing but huge opportunity, but not to keep using this lovely lady from Invercargill, who, by the way, could only make 7 cushions a week, so it was never going to work in China, right? But putting that aside, actually, there is huge opportunity for New Zealand in Southeast Asia, as there is in India, as there absolutely is in China. But unless we're there looking for those opportunities and taking every single one and building respectful, long-term, sustainable business relationships, we'll miss out.
Yeah, and just adding to Minister McClay's comments, just a couple of themes that come through that apply equally to the Ambassador's comments about China, but also to Southeast Asia. You know, if you have any concept or view that renewable energy or a green economy is not high on the list of these countries, you're completely wrong. And I learnt something about that when I was away. I mean, if you look at China, that, you know, they have, because they don't have the natural oil and gas supplies, it is absolutely vital for them to be a green economy, whether it's for moral, commercial or other purposes. It's actually the right answer. I think it was Miles, Thailand had its kind of mission for the whole country was a sustainable, prosperous Thailand. It's sort of not your expectation coming in. So you've sort of got that piece coming through. And then the food security piece, you know, during COVID, you know, we can keep producing food in this country as there are other crises, geopolitical, natural, otherwise. That's incredibly important. 90% of the food into Singapore is imported. So, you know, our role here, whether it's Fonterra or many other brands, is going to be vital. We need to be thinking about those things. Just one thing, do you remember the name of the hot dog made from crickets?
No, I can't because I didn't try it.
I think it was maybe the briquette. They have in Thailand a new hot dog made from crickets. And so alternative proteins, alternative food technology is starting to come to the fore, but for the food security reasons, we need to be at the front of that because that's our natural place to be. So anyway, it was
so on that
the
direct flight to
the briquette. Have you had a
Thailand,
briquette?
Air New Zealand flight to Thailand, will that be served?
Yeah, no, that will be the appetizer. Yeah.
Miles, where you go, Miles?
No, nothing to add on that one.
Oh, why not? All right. What was the highlight for you, Miles, on the trip?
Well, I think it was, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's the connections you build. You know, we know the importance of the dairy, the meat, the seafood, the log industry, tourism. But, you know, there was companies that I'd never heard of before, and you just get an opportunity to connect with them. And there's some wonderful things that are happening around the globe that sort of just go under the radar. And so some great opportunity to connect with them. Again, you know, the role of the Prime Minister, I think he's referred to as New Zealand's sales director or marketing director. He did a wonderful job, I think, to raise the flag and really push the boat out a little bit for New Zealand as a whole. You know, and these, for those that haven't been on these trips previously, that it's quite a well structured and organised event, And I remember, you get the run sheet. You need to be at, I think there was one session, you need to be at breakfast at 8:05 because the Prime Minister will be in the House at 8:12. And coming down on the lift at 8:04, you get the note to say the Prime Minister's in the House, which is, I think, a reflection of his energy, him wanting to be there early, and was often one of the later ones to leave at the events as well. So I think that reflection of him wanting to wave the flag, which is great also.
Yeah, I think just speaking from personal experience, just contrasting with those original missions the government took up to China about the time of the FTA signing, huge amount of excitement by small and large business at opportunity. And so interesting to see that come back when we look at new markets. Before we get on to some Fonterra type questions which have sprung up, Miles, over your big announcements, I'm afraid, if I can just go back to Todd, tell us a bit more about what you might do with Shanghai, presumably CIIE, to coincide with that.
Yeah, well, part of the idea of also saying we want to do more trade and business missions than any government has before is another metric to hold ourselves to and measure ourselves against. But we're being quite thoughtful and not just saying let's go and do a whole lot. How can we deliver on these? And so what you'll see, and there's already early engagement with the business sector through New Zealand, how can we be more strategic? What areas should we go to? Should it be sectorial? Should we be leading investment-only ones, companies that are ready to invest and looking for partners, not just money to sell something? And so one of the first ones we'll do from a strategic point of view is up to the CICC in Shanghai. There's a number of businesses that have been there previously. Who more should we take along because they are ready to form those relationships? And one of my responsibilities is also Minister of Forestry, and the forestry sector often feels underdone. They're not often thought of, and I've said to them they need to be a bit louder, as vocal to advocate for themselves as other parts of the primary sector are. But actually, does it make sense for us to get a group of processors and forestry companies together and go out to particular markets where people are sitting there ready and want the product and want to invest? I think that's how we get the best bang for the buck for the taxpayer resource we'll put in, but it's certainly how we can be much, much smarter to grow value and move towards that very ambitious target of doubling exports by value in 10 years.
Yes, I think it's fair to note a number of the companies have kept that relationship going and have gone to Shanghai over the last few years. I'd like to, before we go to the next questions, just to acknowledge the work that Lisa Lee from the China Chamber of Commerce has done to hustle New Zealand companies to go up there and to make sure everyone is coordinated. So along with obviously NZTE and others.
Yeah, and there's one more point to this actually, and I think, Fran, you asked the Prime Minister this also, what about imports? Because trade is two-way. We often in New Zealand, of course, talk about what we want to sell, and it feels myopic, that's all we're interested in. But actually, if you look at the relationship we have with China as our biggest imports as well as exports, actually that drives competition. It gives choice for New Zealand consumers, but it's more than that. It allows New Zealand companies to innovate in their businesses and to add value and do things they wouldn't otherwise, and through our range of free trade agreements to re-export. And so, the relationship is two-way. With any country of the world, we should be buying and selling. We should be investing in both directions. We should have business people finding it easier to move in both directions where it makes sense, and all of that as a picture helps us to grow the New Zealand economy.
Just before we go to a couple of specific questions related to Fonterra, I'm interested in how we project our brand offshore and whether our business people here can give a sense of what they've picked up. Are there new areas we could be highlighting?
Well, I think what was loud and clear offshore was the Prime Minister's energy and New Zealand being, really leaning into these trade relationships. I think from a brand perspective, what's really clear is that the story of our brand, New Zealand's story, resonate. I think one of the things is that we have to think carefully about how we continue to evolve that and think about how that resonates throughout the whole of Asia, in fact. And it was interesting, you know, every country you have quite different experiences, and you see just a slightly different kind of feedback on how the brand is represented. But if I go to China, which is obviously the reason for being here today, in terms of China, and I'm just going to speak from an air freight perspective, we are known for this premium produce, this fresh produce. So from an air freight perspective, that's critical to keeping that alive. And you know, you talk about doubling exports. Well, since the Airlink started, we have doubled the exports, and that's more like 20 years than 10, but still, I think the trajectory is a good one. But if you take just one example of kind of fresh produce from New Zealand, such as cherries, you know, they sell at, you know, it's sort of roughly like a 3x kind of price relative to the rest of the world. That's extraordinary. And there's great demand for cherries, and I'm just picking an example of many types of fresh produce that go over to Asia, and in particular into China. And it's important that we grow that air freight piece in conjunction with tourism. So the tourism and trade link is really, really vital, especially if you think sustainability. We need to fill the bellies of those planes that are taking the increasing number of visiting friends and relatives and holiday type tourism market that we're seeing bounce back. I mean, we're already up to about 180,000 people coming to and from China for those reasons today. So I think that brand New Zealand, we have to continue to refine it post-COVID, but it's a brand that resonates deeply and is the reason cherries, as an example, sell at that type of a premium.
Miles?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is the innovation piece. So we do know New Zealand has a strong brand. You referred to sustainability, let's not lose sight of that, but the innovation piece, and they look to New Zealand to how can we be innovative, and I think that it's really important we wave that flag. If there's a downside to the sort of the Kiwi humbleness, you know, every meeting we went to in Singapore or in Thailand and in Philippines, yeah, we gave a gift, and it was usually in a brown bag, and we sort of thanked them and got up and had a clap and whatever. And you know, you go to these places, and the way that they thank us was you know, 15-minute fireworks displays on the other side of the river, and I think we've just got to recognise that, you know, if you're playing in the international market, you need to play their game as well. Yeah. And so we've got a heck of a long way to go, I think, in how we respect and recognise visitors, and so we've got some work to do there.
It does make me worry about Premier House. In fact, Miles said to me before we got to the Filipino Palace, he said, what if all the NZX top 50 sort of put in 10k each to sort of get Premier House going? And once we'd finished the fireworks display, I said to him, I think we need to make it 50 per K because we're still not going to compete. But it's such a good point.
And the 757?
I'll tell you what, you hear a lot about the 757, but it got us everywhere on time the whole way. It worked like clockwork, and it was a packed schedule, as you know, 3 countries in 5 days.
Do you want to buy it?
I don't personally want to buy it, and of course Air New Zealand's always available to lease an aircraft, should it ever be required, but look, it did very, very well on that mission. You wouldn't rely on it forever, but...
Thank you. We now have a range of questions for Miles off the back of your announcement last week, and talking about the B2C brands. Are you moving down the value chain? Is there a missed opportunity for the brand story to be told to consumers?
Yes, and so there's quite a few questions coming on that. We're supposed to be at a China summit, but look, there's a couple of things that are probably misunderstood here, and if you go back to our rationale behind this, you know, for us it's around focus and value for all stakeholders across the value chain. And if you only have to go back, you know, 5 to 10 years, you know, we had a strategy that was sort of all-encompassing, and you know, let's be honest, we weren't delivering that so well. And we've got our organisation in a pretty good space where we're focused and we're delivering long-term shareholder value. This is the next evolution of that, and it's a very small part of our business today. Our consumer business is a very small part, albeit it does talk to the brand story well. But we're also known for our B2B innovation, our sustainability story, our food service, our out-of-home consumption, and we believe there's a significantly more value to be had over the long term by focusing even greater in those areas than simply telling a story through a brand alone.
I'll just take one more question, and on Fonterra, and that's what's impact on exports to China given the divestment of the consumer business?
Zero. Simple as that. I mean, when I talk about focus, and I referred to the customer partnerships we have in China, they're some of the strongest we have globally in a relatively short period of time. And they are looking to grow, those domestic consumer brands in China are looking to grow and grow at pace and grow in new categories that we can support them with when it comes to innovation. So you're going to see significantly more through B2B, through ingredients innovation and our out-of-home consumption. And the other point too is that any brands that we do sell, one assumes that a new buyer will be looking to take the milk from New Zealand at the same time. So you will see no impact at all on our China business.
Do you see any Chinese interest in those brands at all?
So we're in day 2 of our announcement, and of course, being listed, you're required to get out to market as soon as a decision's made. So we're talking a 12 to 18 month program, but fair to say the phone's had a couple of charges over the weekend because it's been ringing hot, that's for sure.
I won't press you any further on that. Anyway, one for Dame Therese. With 5 major Chinese airlines now flying direct routes to New Zealand, any strategic plan changes by Air NZ at all?
Yeah, look, there is a lot of capacity between New Zealand and China, and that's why I think loads are building back. We're currently doing dailies through to Hong Kong, through to Shanghai, and through to Beijing through our strategic alliance with Air China. So we're actually providing a lot of that capacity. There are obviously other airlines, Chinese-based carriers that are involved. I think the loads are building back for all airlines at the moment around China. So you've got to be careful not to tip over your front of your skis. But we are watching that closely because we do think there will need to be more growth over time. One thing I think just to be aware of in terms of airline capacity around the world as it relates to China, the US and China has not rebuilt in the same way. So at the moment, there's only about 16% of pre-COVID air traffic between the US and China. If you want to fly business class between the US and China, you'll need to be mortgaging your house quite quickly. It's very expensive. Capacity and demand are quite constrained. So there's a lot of capacity through to China from New Zealand, but the whole ecosystem is still balancing itself, and we are eyeing up Minister McClay's kind of goals around doubling exports in 10 years and what we think we will see in terms of growth of tourism as well. So we're preparing, but we don't want to go too fast either.
Just a couple of quick questions also for you, Todd. One from Mark Piper. With excellent work done over many years to promote free trade and reduce tariffs, what more can Collective NZ Inc. do to help overcome non-tariff barriers?
There's a real focus on non-tariff barriers. So the policy I put out last year included a real focus on that. I've got to say it wasn't easy to think through what a National Party trade policy should be, because I've written many of them, and actually lots of things remain the same. But fundamentally, it's as straightforward as this. We can sign trade deals with countries of the world and open up those barriers. But if there are artificial or designed restrictions in the way that make it harder for New Zealand to sell into those markets, or conversely for these exporters from other countries to sell into the New Zealand market, then actually we're not doing our job properly. And so I've asked officials, particularly from the MPI, but others, to start looking at engaging broadly with the business sector about where they see the greater challenges around non-tariff barriers. And then we're going to come up with a list and start defining which ones we should go after. But to be really, really clear, I said to them that actually this isn't just create a list and we're going to fix it. This happens all the time. It's just the nature of doing business. As different countries change their standards, we need to make sure that that there is mutual recognition when they are the same. And so there's an estimate of $8 to $12 billion lost to the New Zealand economy, our exporters every year as a result of non-tariff barriers. We're going to actually set up a system that fundamentally, one, finds them, goes out and tries to fix them, and then secondly, a system that also can recognise them before they come up so that we can do something about them, so perhaps the business community in New Zealand never knows they were there. They can just do what we need them to do, is get on and run their businesses.
Todd, the only thing I was going to add in this space is that the more collectively we can work as across New Zealand as a whole, as an industry as a whole, the better chance I think of success in the international markets. And then so while I'm on one hand, I'm really encouraged to hear the commentary around FDI, foreign direct investment into New Zealand, encouraging international players back in here. It's really important that we hold the line on the great work we've done on things like sustainability. The last thing we want is foreign investors to come in here and lower our standards. We've worked damn hard up over a number of years, because they're the things that have got us to this point, and we can't let that drop.
Yeah, and I agree completely. It was interesting when I was in Shanghai. There was they called it a bakery platform or a channel, and I thought I was going on television, but actually what it just was a big sort of summit of New Zealand exporters of high quality produce that go into the supply chain for baking. And I got to speak to a man there who said he had a tiny, modest business. He made 12.5 million birthday cakes every year and sold them directly into cafes and supermarkets and so on. And what he said to me was, we are partnering with New Zealand businesses and want to do that more, because the reputation of New Zealand makes it easier for me to sell my birthday cakes. And he said we have a growing middle class, or 500 million people. They are younger. They want food safety, but they're interested in where their food comes from and its contribution to the things that become increasingly more important than them, which is climate change and the environment. So, Miles, your point is a really, really important one. We have a very strong reputation of high-quality, safe food. We just have an exceptional reputation around the world. We must guard it, and we must work hard to enhance it. We must make sure we don't lose it, because I don't know whether we get a premium for those sorts of things, but the premium from that reputation as consumers around the world buy our products, and they are willing to pay more for them.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and for our next session is coming up. But I did want to take the panel. I thought that was a vigorous, upbeat presentation and something we all needed to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.